Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to your flip classroom over your nice long weekend and stuff like that. I know y'all are really excited for winter formal and stuff like that, so I figured I needed to go ahead and get this flip up, right? But let's keep going on with our talk about the Reformation, right? Something that you definitely need to make sure you're doing this weekend is reviewing a lot of this Reformation stuff, right? We're going to try and bang out about like 4 or 5-ish, artwork presentations on Monday before your test and stuff, and I really would like to review with y'all a little bit if I can, right? Like some of this Reformation stuff, some rapid fire review, ask a bunch of questions and stuff like that. So please do me a huge favor and make sure you study this stuff. Big things to focus on for your test that you need to know are your early reformers like Jan Hus, John Wycliffe, and Erasmus, right? Know the difference between all those guys. A lot of that church corruption stuff, right? Know what a denomination is. A lot of this stuff you already know, right, from Mr. Mathern's class because he's the absolute man. But the big thing about it, though, is this slide right here in particular is very, very important, right? It's extremely important because this is the political stuff that y'all didn't talk about as much in his class, right? So remember, you're getting like the very, very Catholic end of the Reformation discussion in your religion class. This is the much more political end of the discussion in this class, right? So when you're looking at the entire thing, we left off in our last flip talking about this big thing called the Diet of Worms, right? The Diet of Worms, right? Not the Diet of Worms.
God, can open worms everywhere?
Thank you, Chandler. All right, so now the big thing, though, is that you got to understand the Diet of Worms is going to come off the heels of a couple of really big events, right? You're going to see Martin Luther. Martin Luther's going to issue his 95 Theses. It's going to start going viral. It's going to start blowing up all over Europe. And a really big thing that we need to remember is that the impact of the printing press is going to be massively important on these writings, right? Because the 95 Theses got printed and spread and moved all over different areas of Europe, right? So on top of everything else is the Pope, Leo X at the time, is going to get his hands on a bunch of those copies, right? And he writes a letter to Martin Luther saying, cease and desist, stop what you're doing, stop saying all these things, your 95 Theses are dumb, we don't like it here in Rome, blah, 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 blah. Immediately end, or you will be excommunicated, right? Ooh, wow, big threat, okay? So now the big thing, no, I'm not saying that sarcastically, I mean that's actually a really big threat during the 1500s, right? So the big thing about it is, and then the Pope proceeds to burn the copies of the 95 Theses that he can get his hands on, right? But the printing press is a big thing. This is like a viral tweet now. You can't burn every copy. The Pope wanted to burn a bunch of them to make a big show of it. So what does Martin Luther do with that letter he gets sent by the Pope that tells him to stop? He burns it back in retaliation, right? This creates a pamphlet war that goes on where Martin Luther writes pamphlets about the Pope and the Pope writes pamphlets about Martin Luther, and things begin to intensify, right? And at the end of 1520, in about December of 1520, going into January of 1521, Martin Luther will be excommunicated, right? Now, this is a big move, because something important is going to happen, okay? Where is Martin Luther living at the time? He's living inside of the HRE, right? The Holy Roman Empire, which will become one day Germany, right? Deutschland, yeah. Now, so the big thing about it that you need to understand, though, too, is that the guy that's ruling the HRE really wants to shut Martin Luther up, right? The guy who's ruling over it is a 19-year-old boy by the name of Charles V, right? Now, Charles V is going to be a very important figure, not only in this unit, but later units as well. So Charles V was 19 years old when he took over, and he really wants to try and figure out a way to get Martin Luther to stop saying all the stuff that he's saying. Why does he want to do this? Because if Martin Luther continues to preach, it could divide the nobility inside the Holy Roman Empire and cause wars and destruction and issues and a decrease in Charles V's power, right? So he holds a meeting, right? And that meeting is known as a diet, right? He's had several diets. There's a bunch of these things called the Diet of Augsburgs, right? There was the Diet of Worms. There's the Diet of Constance. There's like a lot of different diets that happen. But the Diet of Worms is going to be really, really important because it's held in Worms, what is now Germany, but at the time it was Worms, Saxony, right? Now, looking at this entire thing, though, Luther is called before Charles V. And Charles V looks at him in the face and says, bro, you need to chill out, right? You need to stop doing all this stuff and going against the mother church and everything like that. And there's actually a very famous painting of this, the whole thing. And it's right here, Diet of Worms painting. All right, so now look, so the big thing about it, though, is it's a very important meeting. Martin Luther is called in front of the Charles V. Martin Luther is called in front of Charles V. Charles V tells him, stop, shut up, and stop saying all these different things, right? And Martin Luther, just casually, casually tells him, no. Right? So, he says that I will not stop saying these things if somebody cannot actually show me in Scripture where it says that I need to stop saying it, right? And that's a big thing that he says, okay? And there is Martin Luther, right there, just being like, nah, dog, not today. Not going to stop saying these different things. I say what I want, right? He's literally just putting his hand on his chest and saying, I refuse to do that. And then you got the young Charles V glaring over at him with a cardinal at his side, right? So the big thing about it, though, is what is this going to do? It's going to blow up Martin Luther's reputation amongst these folks right here, the German princes, right? The German princes and nobles who watch a defiant Martin Luther tell their ruler to shut up, right? Now this is a big moment because the German princes then begin to rally behind Martin Luther, realizing that with him, they can gain power, right? They can gain power and possibly be able to actually rule over their estates and their landed areas a little bit more efficiently, right? So the thing about it, though, is this unintentionally starts Lutheranism because Martin Luther would be declared an outlaw and all of his writings would be condemned. And basically, Charles V says, if we catch Martin Luther, we will arrest him and we will have him executed and we will have the people that are hiding him arrested and executed as well. So Luther goes on the run. He's on the run. He's trying to actually escape. He's basically a fugitive, right? He's a fugitive. He's trying to move around and all this stuff. But where is he going to go? He's a monk. Where's he going to go? He can't go to a church anymore, right? He's technically not even in the church anymore because he's been excommunicated, right? Where's old bull going to go? Well, the thing about it is those princes of the Holy Roman Empire gave him shelter, right? Those guys that were standing behind him at the Diet of Worms that actually were like, I like this Martin Luther, and I like the cut of his jib, right? I like the idea that they're putting out there and stuff like that. So the princes of the Holy Roman Empire, they give him shelter. They hide him. One of the most famous ones is this guy named Frederick the Wise, a.k.a. Frederick of Saxony and stuff like that, who actually has over apparently 500 relics that he had in the collection and stuff like that. But the big thing to understand, though, is they hide him, right? Now, why would they do this? Again, because it gives them more power, right? It gives them more power and gives them the ability to basically look down upon Charles V, raise armies of their own, and maybe be able to actually break away from the Holy Roman Empire in totality, right? Now, this is another going to be a big thing, is while Martin Luther is in hiding with these German princes, and it's very important that we understand who these princes are and stuff like that, he is going to begin to translate the Bible, and he's going to start the trend of Protestant faiths believing that all Bibles should be written in vernacular languages, right? He starts translating it into German, right, which is a very big stone to throw at the Catholic Church. You're saying, I don't like your ideas, right? And I don't want to have this thing written in only Latin anymore. And he begins to translate it in vernacular languages. Now, this relates a lot to the core ideas of the new religion that is founded under Martin Luther, known as Lutheranism, right? Now, look, Lutheranism is a denomination of Protestantism, right? Protestants are all Christians that are not Catholic. It's a very big umbrella term that covers lots and lots and lots of different people. But Lutherans are just one denomination of Protestantism, right? And Lutherans, under Luther and his guidance, they believed in several different things. Now, in religion, you learned them in Latin. You learned it as sola fide, sola gratia, and then sola scriptura, right? We're just doing them in English, right? We call it grace alone, faith alone, Scripture alone, right? Now, I don't have to draw this as much for y'all because y'all are honors kids and stuff like that. But the big thing is these are the guiding principles of Lutheranism. And these ideas begin to be guiding principles for a lot of Protestant sects that begin to pop up as the time goes on, right? Grace alone is a simple one, right? Grace alone is a simple one where it's it has nothing to do with your sacraments and your Eucharist and your all that kind of stuff. It will be God's will and grace that gets you into heaven, or actually that sends you to hell, if that actually does occur or whatever, right? Faith alone is another big one, right? Faith alone is the idea that you don't need to go profess your faith to a priest. You don't need to go get, okay, next to faith alone, just put weakens the power of the clergy, right? So the big thing you need to understand about the faith alone concept is that Lutheranism, amongst a lot of other Protestant faiths, are going to begin to kind of preach this idea that you don't have to go to a priest for everything, right? You don't have to go to a priest for everything every 3 seconds, right? That you have the ability to actually go on your own and talk to God. You can pray on your own. You don't have to actually communicate through a priest because it was giving them too much power, right? And so that actually violates a lot of Catholic doctrine because in Catholicism, you got to go to a priest to get your Eucharist. You got to go to a priest to go to confession. You got to go to a priest to do all these different things, right? But with the faith alone concept in Lutheranism, he's saying you don't need to do that stuff, right? Pray to God on your own. Talk to him on your own. Don't worry about the Eucharist as much and stuff like that because your faith and the deepness of your faith in your heart will be able to be known by God no matter what, right? And then the last one is Scripture alone. You want to know Bible? You want to know Bible. You want to know God? Go read that Bible, right? And so it talks to you about actually going off and reading a vernacular language, right? Now, a big thing that you need to understand about Martin Luther, and the reason why I put this picture up, because that's definitely not Martin Luther, that's a woman. The big thing you need to understand is that it's very important to kind of just chat about how Martin Luther not a perfect guy, right? Not a perfect guy, goes back on his word a lot, right? Does kind of whatever he wants from time to time, does all these like kind of fishy little things every now and again. Well, Martin Luther married this woman, right? Okay, now originally when he started Lutheranism, he said that priests shouldn't get married, but then he ran off and married a Catholic nun, right? So it's important to kind of demonstrate the fact that Martin Luther's not a perfect person. He's not also really a good person either, right? We talked about how he was anti-Semitic, right, and didn't like people of the Jewish faith. We talked about how like he killed a bug and then freaked out about going to hell and stuff like that. However, his movement of the 95 Thesis is going to really kick off Protestantism in a really big way. Luther, though, also that you need to know, is going to create a lot of other traditions. He approves of the idea of limiting the power of priests, allowing priests to marry, and doing a lot of other different things as well. And this will kind of get the ball rolling, and a lot of other Protestant faiths are going to begin to pop up. And remember, Lutherans became the first Protestant faith because it's the idea of protesting, right? The German princes that supported him, there was this meeting that they had at the Diet of Speyer where they actually protested the Catholic Church and actually talked about the different ideas of the Lutheran faith, and that's why we call them Protestants, because they are protesting the Catholic Church, right? Now, the other big thing that you need to understand about it as well is that, again, this is a lot more political than you think it is, right? A lot more political, because you got to understand one big thing. This is not going to fix everything, right? This is not going to fix everything. It's not like Luther went off and created a new religion and they were right and Catholics were wrong, or it's not like Catholics were right and the Lutherans were wrong. It actually caused a lot of huge political problems that are really going to fall into the people of Europe, because it caused several different periods of very large wars and huge amounts of violence, right? So something that you need to keep in the back of your mind is that this Protestant Reformation started by Martin Luther is going to lead to a lot of big crises, right? Like, so several big things that will lead to the death of hundreds of thousands of people, right? Now, also, something that you need to understand is that these wars were not always Catholic versus Protestant. Now, one big one is going to be the 30 Years' War that we'll talk about that in this class, that killed like 3.5 million people. And we'll talk about like a lot of other things too, that there were a lot of big wars that were Catholic versus Protestant. There was these things called the French Wars of Religion that were straight up Catholic versus Protestant and stuff like that. But the Protestant Reformation will lead to a large-scale amount of violence. But it wasn't always just Catholic v. Protestant. In this particular example that we're about to talk about, known as the German Peasants' Rebellion, it was actually Protestant versus Protestant, right? Because the thing about it is that Martin Luther has now opened up a very, very large can of worms, right? Get it? Call back to that Friends quote from earlier, right? Can open worms everywhere. And it all started at the Diet of Worms. Illuminati confirmed. Now, the big thing about it, though, in general, that you need to understand is that the German Peasants' Rebellion will actually be a group of German Protestant peasants saying and referencing Martin Luther's ideas, being like, wait a minute, this guy said that we are all equal amongst the eyes of God, right? So the big thing you need to understand about this event, okay, this thing goes down, I believe, in 1523. I swear on everything holy. If I'm dead on the money right about that, I'm going to be mind blown. I'm going to be mind blown. I'm going to be mind blown. German Peasants Rebellion. German Peasants War. Here we go. 15, what? What day? What year? 1524. I was off by a year. All right, so now look, the big thing about it, though, in general that you need to understand is that the Germans, peasants, were protesting, right? Peasants meaning like former serfs, tenant farmers, day laborers, right? Poor people began to protest the idea that their rents were going up, but their crops were dying out, right? And a lot of this is coming on during the 16th century, during that little ice age, which is still occurring. And they're like, this is not fair. You cannot charge me more rent when our crops are dying with weather patterns that are completely out of our control. And then they also then began to cite the ideas of Luther. And they were like, look, German princes who are now Protestant, us who are now Protestant, Martin Luther says right here that no man ranks above another man. So you do not rank above me. We need to be common men and work this out. Now, the thing about it is Luther originally is going to support them. At the very early part, he says, yeah, I did say that. That is true. I did really come out and say that, right? And the German peasants were like, yeah! And they all pick up sticks and blades and weapons, and they begin to have some revolts, right? They start freaking out. They start taking over small cities and things like that. They took over a huge chunk of Eastern Germany and stuff like that. Like, if you Google German Peasants' Rebellion, you'll see this massive area over on the right-hand side of what was now Germany, or at the time, the Holy Roman Empire, in areas like Bohemia and stuff like that are now the Czech Republic. They're going to take over a huge amount of land. But then Luther took it back. Now, this is what I mean by it being very political, okay? Luther originally came out and supported the German peasants, and then all of a sudden he turned his back on them, right? He turned his back on them. He's like, those people need to be ran down like dogs in the streets. Luther, What the heck, man? Why would you do this? Why would you turn your back on the people that you supported 2 seconds ago? These poor people who have nothing left to really live on, and they're all dying of famine and stuff like that. Why would you not support their uprising? Because the German princes that are hiding him are the ones that own these people. So, the thing that you need to understand about it is that the German princes told him to take it back. And they were like, remember how we're hiding you? Remember how you're helping us out and we're helping you out? Take back what you said, right? He ends up turning his back on him. The German princes raise armies, and they destroy the rebellion, and over 100,000 people died. We don't even know for sure how many people died, right? But the German princes will lead a massive war against these peasants and destroy them. Now, why am I telling you this? Why? Why am I actually telling you this entire thing, this big question right here? Why? Because it's important to know that the Protestant Reformation is going to spawn into a very large political movement, right? And in no other place, also look at the spread of it too, it's spreading in all directions and stuff like that, and in no other place was it more political than the land of Henry VIII's England, right? So now what we're doing is, with the German Peasants' Rebellion, we're going to kind of shut the book on continental Reformation, right? We're going to shut the book on, Martin Luther. We're shutting the book on Martin Luther. We're just going to put him to bed, right? And in the 1540s, Martin Luther's going to die. He was still under hiding and stuff like that. But all of his damage had already been done, and Lutheranism continued to spread. And it's never going to go away, right? It's going to lead to several different wars, a big, big war called the Schmalkaldic War and stuff like that, because these Schmalkaldic princes were rah, and all this other different stuff. But we're not going to close the book. And we just now know that we got a lot of wars and violence going on in continental Europe, and some other different things happening as well going into the 1540s, right? But now we got to jump backwards and get into the 1530s. We got to talk about this dude, Henry VIII, the man known as the defender of the faith, right? Something that we need to understand about Henry VIII before we go any further is the fact of his last name, okay? So Henry VIII is a Tudor, okay? He is a Tudor. That is his family last name. He is the second of the Tudor kings that have taken over England following this very large war known as the War of the Roses, right? So there was this huge war in England called the War of the Roses, a massive civil war when these two families named the House of York and the House of Lancaster fought against each other to try and claim the throne because the king died with no heirs, right? And the big thing that you need to understand, that was the end of what I believe was the Plantagenet dynasty, and I'm pretty confident I'm right on that. So now, the big thing about it, though, in general, is that Henry VIII, Tudor, okay, he's known as the defender of the faith for a reason, right? He's the second of these two kings. Apparently, back in the day, he was very, very handsome and stuff like that. He was 6'4", and he was also very toxic masculine. But we'll get to that whole thing here in a second, right? The thing about it, though, is why is he known as the defender of the faith? Well, the defender of the faith is a title given out by the Pope. The Pope gives an award to someone every few years where he believes that they are defending the Catholic faith and holding it up, right? So Henry VIII, it's important to talk about, started off as a very ardent Catholic, right? A very, very strong Catholic. And actually, he wrote a very famous book known as Defending the Seven Sacraments, right? And this is when Martin Luther was doing all this stuff in Holy Roman Empire, right? Martin Luther was blowing up. He was doing all this stuff. People were converting to Lutheranism. We got violence occurring and stuff like that. And Henry VIII comes out in the 1520s and he writes a book and he calls it Defending the Seven Sacraments and why everyone should stay Catholic, right? And why these dirty Protestants are disgusting. And so the Pope is going to be like, oh, thank you, Henry. You're the best. And he gives him the title of Defender of the Faith, right? But then Henry VIII's life begins to get a little wonky, right? And what ends up happening is he turns from this, and by the time he dies, he turns into this, all right? So, Henry VIII, after receiving that award, several different events are going to go down in his life that kind of really change the direction of his destiny, right? And the thing that you need to understand is he's going to go Protestant, all right? So, he's actually going to leave the Catholic Church. Why, though? Why would he do this, right? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that he was in a marriage that he didn't want to be in, right? So, Henry VIII was married to this woman named Catherine of Aragon, all right? Catherine of Aragon. Write that down. Her name is Catherine right here, but her name is Catherine of Aragon, right? Henry VIII is the most famous king around because he's the guy that's very well known for having 6 different wives. The same musical that's called Six that was just in New Orleans recently is the one that's made about his wives, right? So Henry VIII is going to have his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, that he didn't even want to marry in the first place. He had no desire to marry her, and she was originally married to his brother, and his older brother died, and that meant that he was going to become king. And Catherine wasn't really set up because they were like, they'll be a good match. Catherine was set up due to the fact that she was very powerful, right? She's from Spain, okay? She was a Spanish noble. She was actually a princess of Spain. She is literally the brother at the time to one of the ruling factions of the Spanish households, right? The thing you need to understand about, Catherine, though, is she was going to be kept in England, and after Henry's brother dies, he ends up having to marry her also, right? So they get married. They try to have kids. they end up having one surviving child, and her name is Mary Tudor, right? But Henry is furious because he wants a boy, and Catherine keeps having miscarriages, and Catherine keeps talking about her family. And also, fun fact, guess who Catherine's nephew is? A very powerful man in the Holy Roman Empire. It's Charles V, the guy that actually had the Diet of Worms, the young guy that had the Diet of Worms and told Martin Luther to shut up. That's her nephew, right? Like, so, like, literally, her brother's child. The thing that you need to understand in general, though, is that Catherine feels very offended by this. Henry's like, I don't want to get married to you. I don't like you anymore. We can't have any boys. I need a boy to pass the throne on to. So he wants to get the marriage annulled. So he calls up the Pope, and he's like, hey, Pope, big fella. I think it's Clement VII by this point. No, wait, that's not true. It's not Clement VII. I think it's... Is it Leo X? It might be Leo X. Now, anyway. So the big thing about it, though, in general, is that when we're looking at it, calls up the Pope. And he actually asked the Pope, I want this marriage annulled because obviously God doesn't like us being married because she won't produce a boy. Fun fact, wasn't Catherine's fault. Actually, Henry's genetic material is the reason why they couldn't have kids. But we'll talk more about that in class, all right? So the big thing about it, though, in general, is he wanted to go off and get a new wife so he could have a boy, right? And the Pope is going to tell him no. And just like Darius, he's very upset. Now he's very upset about this thing. But why did the Pope say no? Why did the Pope say no to Henry? The Pope said no because Charles V told the Pope to say no. That's right. The Holy Roman Empire is like an extension of the Catholic Church. It's kind of like it's like monarchy and stuff like that. And Charles V, who had saved the Pope from being invaded by multiple armies and was trying to stop the spread of Protestantism in the Holy Roman Empire, told the Pope, he's like, look, if you want me to keep trying to fight these wars for you and stuff like that, you're going to tell that turd over in England that he cannot get a divorce from my aunt because it's going to make our family look weak, right? And so the big thing about it is Henry VIII, after being told no, that he can't get his marriage annulled by the Pope, is going to get very upset. So Henry VIII is going to reform Parliament, and he's going to pass a law through Parliament to make it so he never has to ask the Pope for anything ever again because he starts a brand new church, right? He starts a brand new church, and that new church will be known as the Church of England, right? That new church will be known as the Church of England, aka the Anglican Church, right? Which is a really big deal. And the thing that you need to understand is we'll talk more about what's going to happen after this when I see y'all again in class, possibly like on the review day and stuff like that. We'll talk more. I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.